The sunset painted the prairie in shades of amber and gold, as Zephyra Lockhart's wagon wheel cracked with a sickening finality. She had been traveling for weeks, her shoulders aching with tension, her body weary from the constant jostling of the rough trail, and now a broken axle in the middle of nowhere, miles from the nearest town. "Not now," Zephyra muttered, climbing down from the driver's seat. Her skirts swished around her ankles as she crouched to examine the damage. The wooden wheel had splintered beyond repair, and the axle had cracked clean through. She pushed back the brim of her bonnet and wiped sweat from her brow, trying to quell the rising panic in her chest. Nebraska Territory, 1867. The war had ended 2 years ago, but for Zephyra, the battles continued. At 22, she had already weathered more storms than most women twice her age. The death of her parents to influenza, the foreclosure of their Pennsylvania home, the broken engagement to a man who had revealed himself to be less than honorable, all of it had pushed her westward, toward a teaching position in a frontier town she'd never seen. Now, as the evening breeze whispered through the tall grasses, Zephyra faced the very real possibility that she might never reach her destination. She had provisions for another day or two at most. Her horse, an aging mare named Penny, nickered softly, as if sensing her distress. "It's all right, girl," Zephyra said, though her voice trembled. "We'll figure this out." The sound of hoofbeats made her straighten. Her hand instinctively moved to the small pistol, tucked in the pocket of her dress, a parting gift from her uncle, who'd warned her about the dangers a woman might face traveling alone. A lone rider appeared on the horizon, silhouetted against the dying light. As he drew closer, Zephyra could make out his broad shoulders, the weathered Stetson pulled low over his eyes, and the easy way he sat in the saddle, a man who had spent his life on horseback. "Evening, madam," the stranger called, tipping his hat as he reined his horse to a stop several yards away, a respectful distance that immediately put Zephyra slightly more at ease. "Looks like you've had some trouble." "My wagon wheel broke," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "The axle too, I'm afraid." The man dismounted with fluid grace, his spurs jingling softly as his boots hit the ground. He was tall and lean, with sun-bronzed skin that spoke of years under the open sky. His eyes, a startling shade of blue, assessed her situation with a practiced gaze. "That's more than a simple repair," he said, crouching to examine the damage. "Name's Xavier Thornton. Most folks call me Zav." "Zephyra Lockhart," she replied, watching him carefully. He nodded, running a hand along the broken axle. "Where you headed, Miss Lockhart?" "Boys. Idaho Territory. I'm to be the schoolteacher there." Xavier straightened, dusting his hands on his worn denim pants. "That's still a fair piece west. You're just outside of North Platte, Nebraska Territory." "Can it be fixed?" Zephyra asked, gesturing to the wagon. He shook his head slowly. "Not out here. You'd need a proper wheelwright, new timber. It's a major repair." Zephyra's heart sank. Her meager savings wouldn't stretch to purchasing a new wagon, and the teaching position wouldn't wait forever. She bit her lip, fighting back tears of frustration. Xavier studied her for a moment, his expression thoughtful. Then he said something that would change the course of her life. "Well, Miss Lockhart, maybe your wagon broke on this prairie road for a reason. Maybe you're meant to stop here." "Stop here," she echoed. "In the middle of nowhere." A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. "Not exactly. My ranch is about 3 miles east. You can stay there until we figure out what to do about your situation." Zephyra hesitated. Go with a stranger to his ranch. It went against everything she'd been taught about propriety and safety. As if reading her thoughts, Xavier added, "My housekeeper, Mrs. Donovan, lives on the property. She's a respectable widow who'll ensure everything's proper, and my ranch hands can come back for your belongings once you're settled." The sincerity in his eyes made her consider his offer. Night was falling, and her alternatives were few. She could stay with her broken wagon and hope another traveler passed by, or she could accept help from this cowboy who seemed decent enough. "I appreciate your kindness, Mr. Thornton," she finally said. "Zav," he corrected with a gentle smile. "Out here, formalities don't last long." They managed to unhitch Penny from the wagon and secure Zephyra's most valuable possessions, her mother's silver hand mirror, her teaching credentials, and a small box of personal items to Xavier's saddle. "You can ride, Penny, and I'll walk alongside," Xavier offered, but Zephyra shook her head. "Penny's old and has been pulling that wagon all day. I won't burden her further." Xavier nodded, respecting her decision. "Then you'll ride with me. My horse, Diablo, is strong enough for both of us." Before she could protest, he had lifted her onto the saddle with surprising gentleness. He mounted behind her, careful to maintain a respectful distance despite the intimate arrangement. As they rode toward his ranch, the vast prairie bathed in moonlight, Zephyra found herself acutely aware of Xavier's presence, the solid warmth of him at her back, the light touch of his hands holding the reins on either side of her, the clean scent of soap and leather that clung to him. "You're not from around here originally," she said, breaking the silence. "That obvious," he chuckled. "Your accent. There's a hint of something else beneath the western drawl." "Boston," he admitted. "Left when I was 18. That was 12 years ago now." Zephyra did the quick calculation. 30 years old then. "What brought you west?" "The same thing that brings most men out here, a chance to build something of my own." His voice dropped slightly. "And to leave certain things behind." She didn't press further, recognizing the note of finality in his tone. Everyone traveling west had their stories, their reasons. Some were running towards something, others away. She knew that better than most. The ranch appeared as they crested a small rise, a substantial log house with a wide porch, several outbuildings, and a large barn. Lamplight glowed warmly from the windows, a beacon of civilization in the wilderness. "Welcome to Thornton Ranch," Xavier said as they approached. "It's not much compared to Eastern standards, but it's home." Zephyra thought it looked magnificent, solid, and welcoming, a testament to hard work and perseverance. As Xavier helped her dismount, the front door opened, and a plump woman with silver-streaked hair hurried onto the porch. "Xavier Thornton, you said you'd be back before sunset." "I was about to send the boys looking for." She stopped short at the sight of Zephyra. "Oh, we have company. Mrs. Donovan, this is Miss Zephyra Lockhart," Xavier explained, leading Zephyra forward. "Her wagon broke down on the Prairie Road. She'll be staying with us for a while. Mrs." Donovan's face immediately softened with sympathy. "You poor dear, come inside at once. You must be exhausted and famished." She turned to Xavier. "I'll have Jonah prepare the guest room," as Mrs. Donovan bustled Zephyra into the house, chattering about hot baths and supper. Zephyra glanced back at Xavier. He stood in the yard, watching them with an unreadable expression that made her heart flutter strangely. For the first time since leaving Pennsylvania, Zephyra wondered if perhaps things were happening exactly as they were meant to. The guest room was small but comfortable, with a patchwork quilt on the bed and curtains that Mrs. Donovan proudly announced she had sewn herself. The hot bath had been heavenly, washing away weeks of travel dust, and the clean nightgown Mrs. Donovan had lent her, though several sizes too large, was soft against her skin. Zephyra sat on the edge of the bed, brushing out her long auburn hair. Her mother had always called it her crown of glory, though Zephyra had often found it more troublesome than glorious on the trail west. A soft knock at the door startled her. "Miss Lockhart, it's Mrs. Donovan. I've brought you some warm milk with honey. Helps with sleep after a trying day." Zephyra opened the door to find the housekeeper holding a steaming mug. "That's very kind of you." Mrs. Donovan bustled in, setting the mug on the bedside table. "How are you settling in, dear?" "Very well, thank you. I'm grateful for the hospitality." The older woman smiled warmly. "It's nice having another woman around. Been just me and the men for too long." She sat on the edge of the bed, smoothing her apron. "Now, don't you worry about your wagon. Xavier will sort everything out. That man has a way of fixing things that seems broken beyond repair." There was something in her tone that made Zephyra curious. "You've known him a long time," Mrs. Donovan nodded. "Since he first came west. Hardly more than a boy he was, all big dreams and Eastern manners. My late husband and I were working a small claim when Xavier stopped by, looking for work. We took him in." Her eyes grew distant with memory. "After Jacob, that's my husband, passed on from pneumonia, Xavier insisted I come work for him once he'd established this place. He seems like a good man," Zephyra observed carefully. "The very best," Mrs. Donovan agreed emphatically. "Though he carries burdens he won't speak of. Whatever drove him from Boston left scars." She stood abruptly, as if realizing she'd said too much. "But that's his story to tell if he chooses. Now drink your milk and get some rest. Tomorrow's soon enough to worry about what comes next, after Mrs. Donovan left. Zephyra sipped the warm milk and gazed out the window at the star-filled sky. In Philadelphia, buildings and smoke had obscured such views. Here, the vastness of the heavens was almost overwhelming. She wondered about Xavier Thornton, what had driven him from his Boston home, what burdens he carried, why a man of obvious education and means would choose the harsh solitude of ranching life. There was something compelling about him that went beyond his physical presence, a depth of character that intrigued her. "Stop it," she chided herself. "You're here temporarily, until your wagon is fixed or you find another way to boys." Developing an interest in a man you've just met is precisely the kind of foolishness you promised yourself to avoid after Edward. The memory of her former fiancé's betrayal still stung. Edward Chambers had seemed perfect, handsome, charming, from a good family. Their engagement had been the talk of Philadelphia society, until she discovered his gambling debts and his plan to use her modest inheritance to settle them. The humiliation of breaking the engagement had been nothing compared to the shattering of her trust. Zephyra finished her milk and slipped under the quilt. Whatever happened next, she would maintain her independence and guard her heart. The teaching position in boys represented a fresh start, a chance to build a life on her own terms. She wouldn't let anything or anyone divert her from that path. Even if that anyone had the bluest eyes she'd ever seen, and had come to her rescue like a knight in well-worn chaps and spurs. Morning arrived with golden light streaming through the curtains, and the enticing aroma of coffee and bacon. Zephyra dressed quickly in her travel, worn blue calico dress, the cleanest of her limited wardrobe, until her trunks could be retrieved from the wagon. The ranch house was larger than it had appeared in the darkness. A spacious great room with a stone fireplace served as both parlor and dining area, with a large kitchen beyond. The furnishings were simple but well crafted, with touches of comfort that surprised her. Books lining shelves along one wall, a piano in the corner, colorful rugs softening the plank floors. Mrs. Donovan was at the stove, turning bacon with practiced efficiency. "Good morning, dear. Sleep well?" "Better than I have in weeks," Zephyra admitted, accepting a cup of coffee gratefully. "Is there anything I can do to help? You can set the table. The men will be in soon, hungry as bears after morning chores." As Zephyra arranged plates and cutlery on the large oak table, Mrs. Donovan explained the routine of the ranch. "We've got 4 hands who work the place with Xavier, Jonah, Miguel, Caleb, and young Tom. They take meals here but sleep in the bunkhouse. Good men, all of them, loyal to Xavier." The door swung open and the men filed in, bringing with them the sense of fresh air, horses, and honest work. Xavier entered last, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal tanned, muscular forearms. His hair, damp from washing, curled slightly at the nape of his neck. "Miss Lockhart," he greeted her with a smile that creased the corners of his eyes. "I trust you slept well." "Very well, thank you." Zephyra was conscious of the other men watching their interaction with varying degrees of curiosity. Xavier introduced his ranch hands: Jonah, a tall black man with a dignified bearing; Miguel, whose ready smile revealed a missing tooth; Caleb, gruff and bearded but with kind eyes; and Tom, barely out of boyhood, freckle-faced and eager. "The boys and I will head out after breakfast to retrieve your belongings," Xavier said as they ate. "Caleb was a wheelwright's apprentice back in Missouri. He says we might be able to fashion a temporary repair to get your wagon to town, where it can be properly fixed." "That's very kind, but I wouldn't want to impose further," Zephyra began, but Xavier waved away her concern. "It's no imposition. Neighbors help each other out here. It's the frontier way." "We're hardly neighbors," Zephyra pointed out. "I'm just passing through." Something flickered in Xavier's eyes: disappointment. "Nevertheless, we'll help you get where you're going." The men departed after breakfast, leaving Zephyra with Mrs. Donovan. Despite Zephyra's protests, the housekeeper insisted she was a guest and should relax. But idleness had never suited her, so Zephyra found ways to be useful, helping to knead bread dough, mending a tear in one of the curtains, and organizing the surprisingly extensive collection of books in the great room. "Mr. Thornton is quite the reader," Zephyra remarked, running her fingers along the leather-bound spines of volumes ranging from practical agricultural texts to poetry and classic literature. "Always has his nose in a book when he's not working," Mrs. Donovan confirmed, setting a basket of mending beside Zephyra. "His father was a professor at Harvard, I believe, wanted Xavier to follow in his footsteps." "Why didn't he?" The question slipped out before Zephyra could stop herself. Mrs. Donovan shrugged. "Like I said, that's his story. Though if you're interested, you might ask him yourself. He doesn't often open up, but he might for you." "For me? Why would you think that?" The older woman smiled knowingly. "I've known that man for 12 years, Miss Lockhart. I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looked at you last night." Zephyra felt heat rise to her cheeks. "You're mistaken. He was simply being kind to a stranger in need." "If you say so, dear." Mrs. Donovan's tone made it clear she wasn't convinced. "Now, would you like to see the rest of the ranch while we wait for the men to return? It's quite impressive what Xavier's built here." The tour revealed a prosperous operation that spoke of intelligence and hard work. The barn was clean and well organized, with stalls for a dozen horses. A separate building served as a workshop where tools hung in neat rows. The chicken coop, vegetable garden, and smokehouse were all testament to self-sufficiency. "He started with almost nothing," Mrs. Donovan explained as they walked. "Just the land and a handful of cattle. Built the house himself, with help from a few neighbors. Now he's got one of the most successful cattle operations in the territory." "It's remarkable," Zephyra admitted, impressed despite herself. She had always respected ambition and industry. They were returning to the house when the men rode in, Zephyra's trunks and boxes secured on a wagon they'd brought along. "Your belongings, Miss Lockhart," Xavier announced, jumping down from his horse. "All accounted for, though we had to leave the wagon itself for now." We'll go back tomorrow with tools and lumber to see if Caleb's repair plan will work." "I can't thank you enough," Zephyra said sincerely. Xavier's smile warmed his entire face. "Maybe you can. Join me for a ride this afternoon. I'd like to show you the best view on the property." Before Zephyra could formulate a polite refusal, Mrs. Donovan interjected. "What a lovely idea. The fresh air will do you good, Miss Lockhart." And so, after the midday meal, Zephyra found herself on horseback again, this time astride a gentle mare named Daisy, following Xavier along a winding trail that led into low hills behind the ranch house. "You ride well," Xavier observed as they climbed a gradual slope. "My father taught me when I was young," Zephyra explained, "though it's been some years since I've ridden regularly." "Your father was a horseman, a veterinarian actually, in Pennsylvania. He loved all animals, but horses were his specialty." Xavier nodded appreciatively. "A noble profession." "What brought you west, away from family?" Zephyra hesitated, then decided there was no harm in sharing the basic facts. "My parents died 2 years ago. Influenza. The house had to be sold to settle debts. I taught at a school in Philadelphia for a time, but when I saw the advertisement for a teacher needed in boys, it seemed like an opportunity for a fresh start." "I'm sorry about your parents," Xavier said, his voice gentle. "Losing family is never easy, no matter the circumstances." There was understanding in his tone that suggested personal experience with loss. Emboldened, Zephyra asked, "And what about your family? Mrs. Donovan mentioned your father was a professor." Xavier was quiet for a moment, guiding his horse around a rocky outcropping. "He was. Ancient languages at Harvard. Brilliant man, exacting standards. My mother died when I was 10. After that, it was just the two of us, rattling around in a house filled with books and expectations. You didn't want to follow his path. I thought I did for a time. Was studying law, in fact. But then," he trailed off, his expression clouding, then he gestured ahead. "We're almost there." They crested the hill and Zephyra gasped. Spread before them was a panoramic view of the ranch lands, and beyond rolling prairie stretching to distant mountains, the late afternoon sun casting everything in gold. "It's breathtaking," she whispered. Xavier dismounted and helped her down from her horse. "This is where I come when I need to think, or remember why I'm here." They stood side by side, absorbing the majesty of the landscape. Zephyra was acutely aware of Xavier's presence beside her, tall and solid as an oak. "Why did you leave Boston, Xavier?" she asked softly, her eyes still on the horizon. He was silent for so long that she thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice was low. "My father had my life planned out. Harvard law practice, marriage to the daughter of his colleague, a brilliant, suitable girl I'd known since childhood but never loved. When I expressed doubts about this path, he was unyielding." "So you left?" Xavier turned to face her, his blue eyes intense. "I left because I realized I was living someone else's life. My father's vision, not my own. Out here, success or failure, it's all on my terms." He paused. "What about you, Zephyra? Are you living your own life or running from something?" The directness of his question startled her. "Perhaps a bit of both," she admitted. "I wanted to teach to make a difference, but I also wanted distance from certain painful memories." "A man?" Xavier asked perceptively. Zephyra looked away. "A mistake, one I won't repeat." Xavier stepped closer, not touching her, but near enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "Not all men are mistakes, Zephyra." Her heart fluttered traitorously. "I should reserve judgment on that until I've met more than a handful." He laughed, a rich, genuine sound that lightened the moment. "Fair enough. Come on, I want to show you the creek before we head back. The wildflowers there are spectacular this time of year." As they rode back toward the ranch, the sun beginning its descent, Zephyra found herself more confused than ever about her feelings. Xavier Thornton was unlike any man she'd known, straightforward yet complex, educated yet unpretentious, strong yet gentle. And the way he looked at her made her feel seen in a way that was both unsettling and exhilarating. But her path led to boys, to a teaching position and the independent life she'd planned. A brief, unexpected detour couldn't change that, could it? The next few days fell into a pleasant rhythm. Each morning, Zephyra would help Mrs. Donovan with breakfast and household chores. The men worked on repairing her wagon, a process that proved more complicated than initially hoped. The axle required parts that had to be ordered from North Platte, the nearest town of any size. "It could be a week or more before your wagon's road-worthy," Xavier explained over supper on the third evening. "I hope that doesn't disrupt your plans too severely." "The school term in boys doesn't begin until September," Zephyra replied. "I have some time. But I don't want to impose on your hospitality indefinitely." "You're not imposing," Xavier insisted. "In fact, you've been a tremendous help to Mrs. Donovan. I don't think I've ever seen the house so orderly or eaten so well." Mrs. Donovan snorted good-naturedly. "Don't you go giving Miss Lockhart all the credit for my cooking, Xavier Thornton. But she has been a blessing. Reminds me of having a daughter about." Zephyra smiled, warmed by the comment. She had grown fond of the motherly housekeeper whose no-nonsense exterior concealed a kind heart. She'd also developed a comfortable rapport with the ranch hands, particularly Jonah, whose quiet intelligence reminded her of her father. But it was Xavier who occupied her thoughts most persistently. Each day revealed new facets of his character: his patience with young Tom, who idolized him; his fairness in business dealings with the neighboring Pawnee tribe; his unexpected talent at the piano, which he played in the evenings with surprising sensitivity. On the 5th day of her stay, a summer thunderstorm rolled in, keeping everyone close to the house. After the midday meal, Zephyra found herself alone in the great room with Xavier, who was updating his ledgers while she mended one of her dresses. "You're good with numbers," she observed, watching him work with quick, precise calculations. He glanced up with a smile. "A necessary skill for running a business, though I imagine a teacher needs similar precision." "Indeed, though I prefer literature to arithmetic." "There's something magical about introducing young minds to the power of stories." Xavier set down his pen. "What made you want to become a teacher?" Zephyra considered the question. "I had a teacher once, Miss Abernathy, who saw something in me when others didn't. My parents were wonderful, but they were practical people. They valued education but didn't understand my love of poetry and philosophy. Miss Abernathy nurtured that side of me. I suppose I wanted to do the same for other children." "A noble calling," Xavier said with genuine admiration. "What sort of poetry do you favor?" The conversation flowed easily from there, touching on favorite authors, philosophical questions, and eventually circling back to their respective childhoods. Zephyra found herself sharing stories she hadn't told anyone about following her father on his veterinary rounds, about her mother's beautiful singing voice, about the lonely months after their deaths when the world had seemed unbearably empty. Xavier listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions. In turn, he spoke of his own childhood summers sailing in Boston Harbor, the pressure of being an only son expected to uphold family traditions, the solace he'd found in books when human connections felt too complicated. "Is that why you came west?" Zephyra asked. "To escape expectations." Xavier's expression grew serious. "Partly, but there was more to it." He hesitated, then seemed to come to a decision. My father had arranged my marriage to Catherine Winthrop, daughter of his oldest friend. She was brilliant, accomplished, from one of Boston's finest families. On paper, a perfect match. But you didn't love her, Zephyra guessed. I cared for her deeply as a friend. But love? No. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Zephyra had noticed he made when uncomfortable. When I tried to break the engagement, my father was furious. Catherine was devastated not because she loved me romantically, I later learned, but because the scandal would ruin her own plans to study medicine in Europe. Women can't study medicine, Zephyra said automatically, then caught herself. At least, not officially. Catherine was determined to be the exception. She had been secretly corresponding with a female physician in Switzerland who had offered to mentor her. But she needed the cover of being a respectable married woman to avoid scandal. Our engagement provided that cover. So what happened? Xavier's expression darkened. My father discovered Catherine's plans and mine to end our engagement. He threatened to expose her ambitions to her family and ruin any chance she had of pursuing medicine if I didn't go through with the marriage. That's terrible, Zephyra whispered. I confronted him, we argued. Things were said that couldn't be unsaid. Xavier's voice was tight with old pain. I left that night, made arrangements for Catherine to travel to Europe as a widow's companion instead. Last I heard, she had achieved her dream of becoming a physician. And your father died 3 years ago. We never reconciled. The regret in his voice was palpable. Zephyra reached across the table and placed her hand on his. I'm sorry, Xavier. He turned his hand to clasp hers, the touch sending warmth up her arm. I've never told anyone the full story before. Thank you for trusting me with it. Their eyes met, and something electric passed between them. Xavier leaned forward slightly, and for a breathless moment, Zephyra thought he might kiss her. The door banged open as Tom burst in, soaking wet and excited. Mr. Thornton, one of the pregnant heifers is down in the south pasture. Caleb says it looks like she's having trouble with the birthing. Xavier released Zephyra's hand and stood immediately. I'll come right away. He glanced at Zephyra apologetically. Duty calls. Of course, she said, trying to hide her disappointment. I hope the cow will be all right. Would you like to come along? Xavier asked unexpectedly. It might be messy, but if your father was a veterinarian, perhaps you've seen a calving before. Zephyra smiled, touched by his consideration. Many times. I'd be happy to help if I can, despite Mrs. Donovan's protests about the impropriety of a lady witnessing such things. Zephyra soon found herself in the barn, sleeves rolled up, helping Xavier deliver a breech calf. The work was difficult and messy, but there was something profoundly satisfying about working together to bring new life into the world. When the calf finally emerged, a healthy bull with a white star on his forehead, Xavier and Zephyra exchanged triumphant smiles over the exhausted mother cow. You're remarkable, Xavier said softly, his eyes never leaving hers. Most Boston debutantes I knew would have fainted at the mere suggestion of such work. I'm not a Boston debutante, Zephyra reminded him, wiping her hands on a clean rag. And life has taught me that the most rewarding experiences often come with a bit of mess. Later, as they walked back to the house in the rain-washed twilight, Xavier stopped suddenly and turned to Zephyra. Stay, he said simply. Zephyra's heart stuttered. What? Stay here, don't go to boys. His eyes were intense, earnest. We need a teacher here, too. The children at neighboring farms and ranches have no school closer than North Platte. You could start one here. Xavier, I can't just... I have feelings for you, Zephyra, he interrupted, the words tumbling out as if he couldn't contain them any longer. I know it's been less than a week and you probably think I'm crazy, but I've never felt this way about anyone. When you talk, I want to listen to every word. When you smile, it's like the sun coming out after a storm. When we work together like today with the calf, it feels right in a way nothing else ever has." Zephyra stood frozen, her heart racing. Part of her wanted to throw caution to the wind and say yes to everything he was offering. But another part, the cautious, practical part that had protected her after Edward's betrayal, held back. "I have obligations," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "A contract with the school in boys, people expecting me." Disappointment flickered across Xavier's face, but he nodded. "I understand. Obligations matter. Honor matters. It's one of the things I admire about you." He took a step back. "Forget I said anything. Your wagon should be repaired within a few days, and you can continue your journey as planned." He turned and walked toward the house, his shoulders stiff with dignity. Zephyra watched him go, a hollow feeling expanding in her chest. That night, she barely slept, her mind replaying Xavier's words and her response. Had she made a mistake? Or was she being sensible, sticking to her original plan instead of being swept away by romantic impulses? By morning, she had made a decision. After breakfast, she asked Xavier if they could speak privately. "About yesterday," she began when they were alone in his study, a small room off the great room filled with books and maps. "I was taken by surprise." "You don't need to explain," Xavier said, his tone carefully neutral. "I spoke impulsively. It was unfair to put you in such a position." "No, it's not that." Zephyra took a deep breath. "I have feelings for you too, Xavier. Strong ones that frankly terrify me because I never expected them, but I also have commitments I've made, a path I've chosen. I can't simply abandon those." Hope flickered in his eyes. "I understand." "But," Zephyra continued, "I propose a compromise. Let me continue to boys as planned. I'll fulfill my contract for the school term. It's only for 1 year. During that time, we can correspond. If at the end of the year we both still feel the same way, I'll return and we can discuss what might be possible between us." Xavier considered this, his expression thoughtful. "A year is a long time." "It is," Zephyra agreed. "But if what we feel is real, it will withstand the separation. And it will give us both time to be certain." "You're a wise woman, Zephyra Lockhart," Xavier said finally, a small smile playing at his lips. "I accept your proposal. 1 year of letters and then we'll see where we stand." Relief washed over Zephyra. This felt right, honoring her commitments while acknowledging the powerful connection she felt with this remarkable man. "There's one condition," Xavier added. "Before you go, allow me to court you properly for the time you're here. Dinners, rides, conversations without cow-birthing interruptions." His eyes twinkled. Zephyra laughed. "I accept your condition, Mr. Thornton." The next 2 weeks were among the happiest of Zephyra's life. True to his word, Xavier courted her with attentive thoughtfulness. They rode across his land together, picnicked by the creek, and spent evenings reading poetry aloud by the fireplace. He brought her wildflowers and carved her a small wooden horse that she treasured as a keepsake. One evening, he took her to a neighboring ranch for a social gathering, a combination barn dance and potluck supper that brought together the scattered residents of the area. Zephyra met families with children who would indeed benefit from a local school, and found herself mentally planning lessons and considering possible locations. "See, I told you we need a teacher here," Xavier said as they danced a Virginia reel, his hand warm against hers. "I'm beginning to think you might be right," Zephyra admitted. "But my compromise stands. I need to honor my commitment to boys." As the date of her departure approached, Zephyra found herself increasingly torn. The teaching position in boys represented independence and security values she had fought hard to maintain after losing her parents. and breaking her engagement to Edward. But Xavier and the community around Thornton Ranch offered something else: connection, purpose, and the possibility of a love deeper than she had ever imagined. On the eve of her departure, Xavier took her to the hilltop where they had first really talked. The summer evening was perfect, warm with a gentle breeze, the sky painted in shades of pink and gold as the sun began its descent. "I have something for you," Xavier said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small leather-bound book. "To read on your journey west." Zephyra opened it to find a collection of poems, some printed and others handwritten. "Did you copy these yourself?" Xavier nodded, a touch of embarrassment coloring his features. "Some are favorites I thought you might enjoy. Others, I wrote them about you, about us." Deeply moved, Zephyra ran her fingers over his neat handwriting. "This is the most thoughtful gift I've ever received. There's something else." Xavier took her hands in his. "I know we agreed to correspond for a year before making any decisions. I'll honor that. But I want you to know my heart is decided already." He dropped to one knee, still holding her hands. "I'm not proposing, not yet, but I am promising. When you return, if you choose to return, I'll be waiting with a ring and a question." Tears filled Zephyra's eyes. "Xavier." He rose and gently wiped away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. "You don't need to say anything now. Just know that wherever you go, whatever you decide, you have my heart." In the fading light, he leaned down and kissed her, a gentle, tender kiss that held both promise and restraint. Zephyra felt it down to her soul, a connection so profound it transcended the physical. When they parted, she whispered, "I will come back to you, Xavier Thornton. One way or another, I will come back." Morning came too quickly. Zephyra's repaired wagon was packed with her belongings, plus provisions for the journey that Mrs. Donovan had insisted on providing. The ranch hands had gathered to see her off, each offering awkward but sincere good wishes. Mrs. Donovan hugged her fiercely. "You come back to us, you hear? This place hasn't been the same since you arrived, and it won't be the same after you go." "I'll be back," Zephyra promised, returning the embrace. "Take care of him for me." "That I will, though he won't be easy to live with while you're gone." Mrs. Donovan stepped back, dabbing at her eyes. Finally, it was time to say goodbye to Xavier. He stood by the wagon, outwardly composed but with emotion evident in his eyes. "I've arranged for a trusted friend to accompany you to Fort Kearney," he said. "From there, you can join a larger wagon train for safety. The trail should be relatively safe this time of year, but I'll rest easier knowing you have protection for at least the first leg of the journey." Zephyra nodded, too choked with emotion to speak. "Write to me when you reach Boys," Xavier continued. "I'll be counting the days." "I will," Zephyra managed, "and I'll read your poems every night." Xavier helped her up to the wagon seat, his hands lingering on her waist. "1 year," he said softly. "1 year," she echoed, gathering the reins. As the wagon pulled away from Thornton Ranch, Zephyra kept her eyes forward, afraid that if she looked back, her resolve would crumble. But she carried with her the certainty that whatever happened in Boys, her heart had found its home on a Nebraska ranch with a blue-eyed cowboy who had seen her broken wagon on the Prairie road and declared she was meant to stop there. The journey to Boys was long and often arduous, but Zephyra's spirits remained buoyant. Each mile took her closer to fulfilling her commitment, which in turn would allow her to return to Xavier with a clear conscience. True to his word, Xavier had arranged for a companion, a grizzled frontiersman named Silas, who had once worked for him, to escort her to Fort Kearney. From there, she joined a wagon train headed west, finding companionship with a missionary couple and their teenage daughter. The letters began almost immediately. Xavier's first caught up with her at Fort Kearney, carried by a cavalry officer who had business in the area. It was 8 pages of his neat handwriting detailing ranch happenings, his thoughts on books he was reading, and heartfelt expressions of how much he missed her. Zephyra read it so many times the paper became soft along the folds. She wrote back whenever possible, sending letters ahead to towns where Xavier had connections who could forward her correspondence to him. The exchange became her lifeline during difficult stretches of the journey, mountain passes where wagons had to be lowered by ropes, river crossings that claimed precious possessions, days of relentless heat or driving rain. At night, she read his poems by firelight or lantern, finding in them a depth of feeling that both humbled and exalted her. Xavier had a gift with words, expressing emotions that many men might find impossible to voice. Boys, when she finally reached it in late August, was a growing town nestled in a fertile valley. The school was a simple one-room building, but well constructed and equipped with the basics she would need for teaching. The town council that had hired her provided lodging with an elderly couple whose children were grown, giving Zephyra a small but comfortable room of her own. The work was challenging but rewarding. Her students ranged from 6 to 16, with varying levels of previous education. Some were the children of merchants and professionals, others from farming and mining families. All were eager to learn, though some required more encouragement than others. Zephyra threw herself into teaching, developing creative methods to engage her diverse class. She organized spelling bees and recitation contests, started a small library with books donated by townspeople, and introduced her students to the poetry she loved. Xavier's letters arrived every 2 weeks or so, carried by the stagecoach that connected boys to the Eastern Territories. Each one was an event that she saved to savor in private, often reading late into the night by candlelight. In October, a package arrived along with his regular letter, a small wooden box beautifully carved with prairie flowers. Inside was a silver locket containing a tiny sketch of Xavier, expertly rendered by an artist who had passed through his ranch. The accompanying note read simply, "So you won't forget my face," as if she could. His features were imprinted on her heart, his blue eyes appearing in her dreams with such regularity that sometimes she woke expecting to find him beside her. Zephyra flourished in boys, earning the respect of parents and the adoration of her students. She made friends, particularly with the local dressmaker, a widow named Clara who shared her love of literature. But despite the satisfactions of her work and the pleasant social life she developed, there remained in Xavier shaped hole in her heart that nothing could fill. Winter descended on Idaho Territory with a ferocity that surprised even the locals. Heavy snows isolated boys for weeks at a time, making travel difficult and mail delivery sporadic. Zephyra worried about Xavier. Was he warm enough? Was the ranch weathering the season? Were the cattle surviving the bitter cold? When a letter finally arrived in January, after nearly a month without word, she tore it open with trembling hands. The contents both relieved and distressed her. Xavier was well, but the ranch had faced challenges. A particularly vicious blizzard had trapped several cattle in a remote pasture. Xavier and his men had managed to save most of them, but Xavier himself had fallen through ice while rescuing a stranded calf. He developed pneumonia afterward, but assured her he was recovering well under Mrs. Donovan's strict care. "Don't worry about me, my darling," he wrote. "By the time you read this, I'll be fully recovered, but the incident made me think about life and what truly matters. If these months apart have taught me anything, it's that I cannot imagine a future without you in it. I dream of you teaching children born on this land, our children, perhaps, and those of neighbors." I dream of building a schoolhouse here, with wide windows to let in the prairie light you've come to love. I dream of reading together by the fire in winter and watching sunsets from our hilltop in summer. 1 year seemed sensible when we agreed to it, but now each day without you feels like an eternity. Zephyra pressed the letter to her heart, tears flowing freely. She felt exactly the same way. The separation, meant to test and confirm their feelings, had only strengthened her certainty that Xavier was the man she was meant to love for the rest of her life. She wrote back that night, pouring her heart onto the page. "I fulfill my duties here with diligence," she told him, "but my heart is always with you on the ranch. When I teach, I imagine doing so in that schoolhouse you described. When I read poetry aloud to my students, I hear your voice reciting the lines. When I walk through town, I find myself looking for your face among the strangers. I am here in body, but in spirit. I never left Nebraska." Spring came to boys with bursts of wildflowers and swollen rivers from mountain snowmelt. Zephyra's school term was drawing to a close, and the town council had begun making noises about extending her contract. They were pleased with her work and hoped she would stay another year. Zephyra was carefully non-committal, knowing that her future lay elsewhere. But a nagging worry had begun to plague her. What if Xavier had changed his mind? His letters remained affectionate and constant, but what if, upon her return, he discovered that his feelings had been magnified by absence? What if the reality of her didn't match the woman he had built up in his mind during their separation? These doubts were still troubling her when Clara delivered unexpected news. A cattle buyer from Nebraska Territory was in town on business. He knew of Thornton Ranch and its owner. Zephyra sought him out immediately at the hotel where he was staying. The man, a burly, bearded fellow named Henderson, was happy to share what he knew. "Thornton. Sure, I know him. Fine operation he's running. Been expanding too. Bought the adjacent property when old man Willis decided to move back east. Word is he's building something big on that land, though he's been tight-lipped about what exactly. Is he well?" Zephyra asked hesitantly. Henderson studied her with sudden understanding. "You must be the schoolteacher he's sweet on. He mentioned he was courting a lady teaching in boys." He smiled kindly. "He's doing just fine, miss. Recovered completely from that bout of pneumonia over the winter. Seems happier than I've ever seen him, truth be told. Got a spring in his step that wasn't there before." Relief washed over Zephyra. "Thank you, Mr. Henderson. That's good to hear. He asked about you too," Henderson added. "Wanted to know if I'd encountered the new teacher in boys during my visit. Said to tell you, if I did, that the year is almost up, and he's keeping his promise." Zephyra's heart soared. Xavier hadn't forgotten. He was waiting for her, just as he had said he would. The school term ended in June with a celebration that brought the whole community together. Zephyra's students performed recitations and songs, demonstrating their progress to proud parents. Afterward, there was a picnic on the school grounds, with speeches thanking Zephyra for her dedication. The town council chairman approached her as the festivities were winding down. "Miss Lockhart, we've prepared a contract for next year, with a raise in salary, of course. You've done wonders with our children." Zephyra took a deep breath. "I'm honored by your confidence, but I'm afraid I won't be staying in boys." The chairman's face fell. "But why? Have we not made you welcome? Is the salary insufficient?" "It's nothing like that," Zephyra assured him. "Boys has been wonderful, and I've loved teaching your children, but I made a promise to someone very dear to me, and the time has come to fulfill it." Understanding dawned in the chairman's eyes. "A young man back east, is it?" "Not east," Zephyra corrected with a smile. "Nebraska Territory." Within a week, Zephyra had packed her belongings and made arrangements to travel with a merchant family returning east after delivering goods to Idaho. She sent a final letter to Xavier, informing him of her departure date and expected route, though she knew it might not reach him before she arrived at the ranch. The return journey seemed both endless and fleeting. Endless because each day without Xavier stretched interminably, fleeting because each mile brought her closer to the future she had chosen. She read and reread his letters, tracing the familiar handwriting with her fingers, imagining his voice speaking the words. As they approached Nebraska territory, Zephyra's anticipation grew almost unbearable. What if he wasn't there? What if something had happened to him? What if he had changed his mind? But beneath these anxieties lay a bedrock of certainty. Xavier loved her. She loved him. Whatever challenges might lie ahead, they would face them together. The merchant family's route would take them through North Platte, which was close enough to Thornton Ranch that Zephyra could hire transportation for the final leg of her journey. As their wagon rolled into the growing town, Zephyra was struck by how much had changed in the year she'd been away. New buildings lined the main street, and the population seemed to have doubled. "I'll need to arrange for a buggy to take me to Thornton Ranch," Zephyra told the merchant as they unloaded at the town's general store. "It's about 20 miles east of here." "Thornton Ranch." The merchant raised his eyebrows. "That's where you're headed? Well, ain't that something?" The owner was in town just yesterday, buying supplies. Said he was expecting a special visitor. Zephyra's heart leaped. "He knows I'm coming." Didn't say who, just that it was important. Been making all sorts of preparations, according to the gossips at the store. Hope swelled in Zephyra's chest. Perhaps her last letter had reached him after all. She was making arrangements with the livery stable for transportation when a familiar voice called her name. Turning, she saw Jonah, Xavier's ranch hand, striding toward her with a broad smile. "Miss Lockhart, we've been watching for you since your letter arrived 3 days ago. Mr. Thornton sent me to town every day to check the stage and wagon trains coming through." "Jonah!" Zephyra exclaimed, genuinely happy to see the kind-faced man. "It's wonderful to see you again." "The feeling's mutual, miss. Everyone at the ranch has been counting the days till your return." He gestured to a handsome buggy parked nearby. "Mr. Thornton sent his personal conveyance for you. Said a lady shouldn't have to travel in a work wagon after such a long journey." Touched by Xavier's thoughtfulness, Zephyra allowed Jonah to help load her trunks onto the buggy. As they set off toward the ranch, she found herself bombarding him with questions about everyone Mrs. Donovan, the other hands, the animals, and of course, Xavier himself. "He's been like a man possessed this past month," Jonah told her, his dark eyes twinkling. "Working from dawn till dusk on that project over on the Willis property. Won't let anyone see it before it's finished." "What project?" Zephyra asked, curiosity piqued. Jonah shook his head. "Not my place to say, Miss Lockhart. Mr. Thornton would have my hide. You'll see soon enough." As they crested the familiar rise that would bring the ranch into view, Zephyra's breath caught in her throat. There it was, the place that had lived in her dreams for a year. The house looked exactly as she remembered, solid and welcoming with smoke curling from the chimney. But something was different. Off to the side, where there had previously been only open prairie, stood a new structure, a building with a pitched roof and large windows that caught the afternoon sunlight. "What is that?" Zephyra asked, pointing. Jonah smiled mysteriously. "That's Mr. Thornton's surprise. Been building it all spring." Before Zephyra could ask more questions, she spotted a figure on horseback racing toward them across the open grassland. Even at a distance, she would know that rider anywhere: the straight back, the confident seat in the saddle, the hat tipped at a familiar angle. "Xavier," she whispered, her heart pounding. Jonah pulled the buggy to a halt as Xavier reached them, dismounting with the fluid grace she remembered so well. He stood for a moment, just looking at her, his blue eyes drinking her in as if he couldn't quite believe she was real. "You came back," he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. "I promised I would," Zephyra replied softly. And then she was in his arms, lifted bodily from the buggy seat as Xavier embraced her with a fervor that left no doubt about his feelings. She clung to him, breathing in his scent, feeling the solid reality of him after so many months of dreams and memories. When he finally set her down, keeping his arms around her waist as if afraid she might disappear, Zephyra saw tears in his eyes that matched her own. "I missed you," she whispered. "Every day, every hour. And I you," he replied, brushing a strand of hair from her face with gentle fingers. "Nothing has been right without you here." He turned to Jonah, who was watching with undisguised satisfaction. "Take Miss Lockhart's belongings to the house. Tell Mrs. Donovan we'll be along shortly. I want to show Zephyra the surprise first." As Jonah drove away with her trunks, Xavier helped Zephyra onto his horse, then mounted behind her. With his arms around her, holding the reins, he guided the horse toward the new building Zephyra had noticed. "What is it?" she asked, leaning back against his chest, savoring his nearness. "Something I've been building for us," Xavier replied, his breath warm against her ear. "For our future, if you still want it to be our future." They reached the building, and Xavier helped her dismount. Up close, Zephyra could see it was beautifully constructed, with a covered porch running the length of the front and large, multi-paned windows. A bell cupola perched atop the roof. "It's a schoolhouse," she breathed, understanding dawning. Xavier nodded, taking her hand and leading her up the porch steps. "For the children of the area, and perhaps someday for our own." He opened the door to reveal a spacious, light-filled room with rows of desks, a teacher's desk at the front, and bookshelves already stocked with volumes. A blackboard covered one wall and colorful maps hung on another. "Xavier, it's perfect," Zephyra gasped, turning in a circle to take it all in. "But how did you know I would come back, that I would want to teach here?" Xavier's expression grew serious. "I didn't know, I hoped, I prayed, but mostly I wanted to show you that I meant what I said a year ago. That I see you, all of you, and want to build a life that honors who you are and what matters to you." He took both her hands in his. "When your wagon broke on that Prairie road and I said you were meant to stop here, I had no idea how right I was. You were meant to come into my life, Zephyra Lockhart, to change it, to complete it." He released one of her hands to reach into his pocket, pulling out a small velvet box. "Now I'm asking you, properly this time, to stay, not just for a visit but forever." He opened the box to reveal a ring of perfect sapphire surrounded by tiny diamonds, set in gold. "It's the color of the prairie sky," he said softly. "The sky that brought you to me." Tears blurred Zephyra's vision as Xavier dropped to one knee before her. "Zephyra Lockhart, I have loved you since the moment you stood beside your broken wagon, refusing to give in to despair. I loved you through every letter, every mile that separated us, every day that passed without seeing your face. I will love you for all the days of my life if you'll let me." He took a deep breath. "Will you marry me?" "Yes," Zephyra whispered, then louder. "Yes, Xavier Thornton, with all my heart, yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to kiss her, a kiss that held a year's worth of longing, of dreams deferred, of love that had only grown stronger through separation. When they finally broke apart, Xavier rested his forehead against hers. "I was thinking," he said, a smile in his voice, "that perhaps we could have the wedding right here in the schoolhouse. It seems fitting." "Perfect," Zephyra agreed. "Where it all began, in a way." Xavier raised an eyebrow. "Oh, I thought it began with a broken wagon on a prairie road." Zephyra laughed, joy bubbling through her. "No, my love. It began when a cowboy looked at that broken wagon and said I was meant to stop there." "And you were," Xavier murmured, drawing her close again. "You absolutely were." The wedding took place 6 weeks later, on a perfect September day when wildflowers still bloomed across the prairie and golden sunlight streamed through the schoolhouse windows. The building was filled to capacity with well-wishers, Xavier's ranch hands and their families, neighboring ranchers, townspeople from North Platte, and even some of Zephyra's former students from boys who had made the journey with their parents to see their beloved teacher married. Mrs. Donovan had outdone herself with the preparations, transforming the schoolhouse with garlands of prairie flowers and ribbon. She'd also spent days cooking for the celebration feast that would follow the ceremony. Zephyra wore a gown of ivory silk that Clara, her dressmaker friend from boys, had created specially for the occasion. Her auburn hair was adorned with a crown of white roses, and she carried a bouquet of wildflowers gathered from the hillside where she and Xavier had first truly connected. As she walked down the aisle between the school desks, on the arm of Jonah whom she had asked to give her away, Zephyra's eyes were fixed on Xavier. He stood tall and handsome in a new black suit, his blue eyes shining with love and pride. Beside him, young Tom fidgeted nervously with the ring he was responsible for presenting at the proper moment. The ceremony was simple but deeply meaningful. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promising to honor, cherish, and support each other through all of life's journeys. When the circuit riding minister pronounced them husband and wife, the cheer that went up nearly lifted the roof off the new schoolhouse. The celebration continued well into the night, with feasting, dancing, and storytelling around bonfires. As twilight deepened into evening, Xavier led Zephyra away from the festivities to their special hilltop. There, under a canopy of stars, he presented her with one final wedding gift, the deed to the schoolhouse and surrounding acre of land, put in her name. "So you'll always have something that's truly yours," he explained, "no matter what happens. Your independence matters to me." Deeply moved by his understanding, Zephyra kissed him with all the passion in her heart. "I love you, Xavier Thornton." "And I love you, Zephyra Thornton," he replied, savoring her new name, "now and always." They returned to the ranch house, their home now hand in hand, ready to begin the life they had both chosen. The life that had perhaps been destined from the moment a wagon wheel broke on a prairie road and a cowboy recognized fate when he saw it. 2 years later, on another perfect September day, Zephyra stood on the porch of the schoolhouse, watching her students file in for the first day of the new term. At 25, she had found the fulfillment she had always sought: meaningful work, a loving community, and a marriage based on mutual respect and passion that seemed to deepen with each passing day. The school had flourished under her guidance, growing from 12 students that first year to 28 now, with children coming from as far as 15 miles away. For those who lived too far to make the daily journey, Xavier had built a small dormitory where they could stay during the week, returning to their families on weekends. As the last of the children disappeared inside, Zephyra felt a familiar presence behind her. Xavier's arms encircled her waist, his hands resting gently on the swell of her stomach where their first child grew, a daughter. Zephyra was certain, though Xavier was convinced it would be a son. "Ready for another year of shaping young minds, Mrs. Thornton," he murmured against her ear. Zephyra turned in his embrace, rising on tiptoe to kiss him softly. "Always, Mr. Thornton, though I may need some help come winter when this little one arrives." Xavier's hand caressed her rounded belly with reverence. We'll figure it out together as we always do. Zephyra glanced at the schoolhouse, then out across the prairie to their ranch house in the distance, and finally up at the man who had changed her life with a simple observation about a broken wagon. "I wouldn't want it any other way," she said, and meant it with all her heart. As if sensing her contentment, the baby kicked beneath Xavier's hand, making them both laugh with delight. "I think she agrees," Zephyra said, leaning into her husband's strength. Xavier corrected with a teasing smile, their ongoing debate as affectionate as ever. Together they walked into the schoolhouse where their journey had truly begun, ready to face whatever adventures lay ahead, secure in the knowledge that some broken wheels lead exactly where they're meant to.